Moving along to tools. All right, we're climbing up that pyramid of pain. We're now at challenging. So again, we have the ability to minimize, the ability for the adversary to get tools installed. Then obviously, it becomes challenging for the adversary to overcome. Again, a layered approach, right? For example, is certainly going to help. For instance, right, if the adversary does land on an asset and is now trying to get tools installed on that asset, maybe keylogger or, other utilities to create backdoors and things like that, they might actually connect to a tools repository that they might have that might be housed on a IP address that we deem as bad, right? Obviously, again, defeating the control around IP address is fairly easy. They just need to rehouse those tools to an IP that's not known as bad or malicious and start pulling those tools down. So, again, the layered approach or defense in depth still applies, right? The more layers you have, the more annoying things become. And hopefully the adversary just moves on to some other environment that has less of these controls or preventative capabilities in play. So when we look at tools themselves, we're looking at things like endpoint amp, umbrella, tetration, firepower, email, web, threat grid, and stealth watch all have detection type capabilities. And when we get into defensive, more the preventative side, we've now shrunk that capability stack down, right? And so now we've got endpoint amp, we have tetration, we have firepower, and we have web. So let's dig into this a little bit deeper, focused on the detection and prevention capability. So stealth watch and cognitive, purely detective capability or detection capability. We've seen this throughout, and we'll continue to see it when we move into the next section around tactics, techniques, and procedures, right? TTPs. So stealth watch and cognitive provides tool insight through intelligence such as, an adversary leverages PowerShell or Windows Task Scheduler is used to schedule the payload. And so, there's a variety of tools that could be used. I think in the true essence of this, the tool wasn't really things that are built into the platform, although, one could still consider those as tools. For example, a tool might be, installing Netcat on an endpoint to create a backdoor, right? Well, you could do that with PowerShell. To me, obviously, even these tools are important. Now, you could still see, the potential of Netcat making the connection outbound, right, as well. So additional context data can be provided with the Cisco AnyConnect network visibility module. So that NVM, again, that includes devices, processes making the connections, the parent process, the user invoking the process as examples, that, helping identify the tools that might be being leveraged, right? Also, that SHA is going to be helpful, right, in regards to the tool itself, because you could have a capability like endpoint amp that could detect that tool and quarantine that tool automatically. Further integration with threat grid further enriches the insight into these tools being leveraged, such as startup activities, created drop files, contacted domains, etc. So again, you're going beyond the tool and collecting data a little bit more holistically. But threat grid, because you can dump in a file into a sandbox environment and understand its behavior, you might be able to identify the tool that's being used there. Endpoint amp can detect and block tools based on file reputation, or added to an application block list, right? So you might just have an application block list that blocks certain applications that you think an adversary might use, right, or leverage. Cisco Endpoint AMP can also determine tools being leveraged with the integration of threat grid for sandboxing, right? This is what I just mentioned earlier around Stealth Watch. As an example, a file detonated which ties to or tries to make an outbound connection, right? And so that could be a tool, meaning that it could be Netcat that's trying to make the connection outbound. Endpoint and cloud-based IOC scans, orbital scans can also be available, providing the ability to detect tools embedded in the system or communicating outbound. For example, application launched a shell, right? The application named executed an unknown application, which in turn launched a command shell. For example, Java launched a shell, right? So this intelligence, again, gained at endpoint AMP, can also be used to, feed into other preventative capabilities. So endpoint AMP has a detection and a preventive or prevention capability built in. Firepower Threat Defense has the ability to detect and prevent applications. So I say /tools because you can do this with tools as well that the adversary might be using. Also, we can monitor their connections outbound. We can also build signatures using OpenAppID as well, so we can identify things or tools that might be used and build out signatures if they're not already included in Firepower Threat Defense, and just have a very simple rule that says if we see any application /tool making any or traversing Firepower, we're going to block it and alert on that. IPS rules can be used to detect and prevent applications from communicating within the network. My example here is Netcat. So you can build signatures to look for certain patterns as well. Firepower can also determine tools being leveraged with the integration of Threat Grid. That's that whole behavioral analysis. And then here's an example of a file detonated and determines that the scheduled task or Windows scheduler was used, which can be leveraged to schedule programs or scripts to be executed at a date and time. Again, it's about pulling all the pieces together to get information that potentially this tool exists, right? Intelligence gain can obviously be fed into other preventative platforms. Cisco email security has the ability to detect tools being leveraged. For example, URL, a malicious link, could equal protected by URL filtering or reputation. You've got outbreak filtering, cloud URL analysis, Cisco advanced phishing protection, attachment file antivirus, right? Again, just giving you a kind of quick example, and that might detect the tool that might be being used. Obviously, advanced malware protection could also be leveraged. Outbreak filtering, you got macro detection that could also allow us to do things like safe print, so strip out the macro, but also identify that there was a macro that was built in. You've got content scripts, right, that now tie into things like anti-spam. You've got Graymail, content filtering. Cisco email security with integration to Threat Grid's got that sandboxing capability. Again, because of that, we can see, an application or tool making an outbound connection, as an example, say Netcat, to build in some additional persistence. Intelligence gained here can be used in preventative platforms as well. Web and cognitive, so WSA with the advanced malware protection can detect and block access to files /tools that are deemed malicious. Cognitive provides insight into the adversary's behaviors. So the additional intelligence that's fed in through cognitive and Cisco Talos in general is certainly going to be helpful. Again, PowerShell or Windows Task Scheduler could be used to schedule the payload that could be tied to a payload that's very specific, right? And could identify the tool being used. The WSA also has the ability to do layer 4 traffic monitoring. Again, we can block, botnets or phone home type activities being initiated, and again, further identifying that the tool might be in play. Further integration with Threat Grid, again, you'd be able to detect startup activities, created or dropped files, contact domains, static information, network behavior, system behavior, etc. Intelligence obviously gained here is going to be fed into preventative platforms. So you can see there's a little bit of a combination here. There's a little bit of detection as well as prevention type capabilities. At the end of the day, you know, you want to prevent 100% of everything. Reality is you're never going to be able to achieve that. And therefore, the detection capability may provide the information needed to build in that preventative capability. Umbrella, now you're looking at more of a detection capability. So Umbrella investigates malicious hashes, leveraging Cisco Talos intelligence and threat grid sandboxing. Umbrella Investigate gives the most complete view of those relationships. And for some that have heard the previous videos, some of this sounds a lot the same from other things, because each element will provide, you know, additional insight, right? Investigate, you know, does provide some insight into the relationships between domains, IPs, and files. And that's certainly going to help, right? And so, you know, that's going to help whether it's going to be a tool, whether it's going to be a domain name, right? It's certainly going to be helpful. Now, whether or not you have a prevention capability, that's something else. In this case, we're really looking at more of a detection type capability. There could be an underlying preventative capability here as well, in the sense that if the tool is known to be bad, then there's a potential to block it, right? If you have a proxy capability enabled within Umbrella. Tools identified can be used to feed into preventative platforms. Obviously, Umbrella capabilities such as DNS proxy, advanced malware AMP, cloud delivered firewall functionality can also help prevent these tools from actually invoking the will against the victim itself. So this one here, I'm going to change this Umbrella to, you know, red and green, because it definitely has some preventative capabilities as well. I must have missed that. Threat Grid has the ability to analyze files, calculate file hashes. This includes identifying behavioral indicators that are seen when the file is executed. Threat Grid can also analyze URLs which are executed within that sandbox. So toolkits can be identified, such as cheat engine hacking tool detected. Threat Grid has that ability built in, and again, what it's going to be able to do is provide us insight into what you know, that SHA or that hash that we originally submitted actually was up to. Behavioral indicators are key traits of the behaviors that are identified as indicators, but you know, obviously it's what the adversary wants to invoke on the victim itself, right? And the behaviors are typically you know, malign, right? Meant to be malicious. So behaviors, indicators also include severity levels, HTTP traffic, DNS traffic, TCP IP network sessions, processes, artifacts, registry activities, and more. Intelligence gained here can be used elsewhere. This is, again, 100% preventative type capability here. Tetration has both detection and prevention capabilities. So Cisco Tetration collects baselines and process details running on each of the servers. So this information includes the process ID, process parameters, the user associated with it, the process time, the process hash, signature information, right? Again, if you heard the previous videos, this is a lot of the same thing, right? Because how we're trying to meet this objective here, and when I looked at this, was that some tools are going to come in the form of a file, and that file is going to have a hash, and that hash I can evaluate, right? And either detect or prevent against that specific hash or threat, right? In this case. So to further assist in discovery of tools that are running on the victim machine and being used to further infiltrate the host and environment, and preventing the tools from compromising the host or hosts. So tetration is going to help that preventative capability, right? Also, forensically, it's going to be tremendously valuable. You can search for servers running specific processes or process hash information. Again, you can get that tree view snapshot of all processes running on a server. Cisco Tetration has algorithms available to track behavior pattern changes and find similarities to malware behavior patterns, right? So for example, a privileged escalation followed by a shell code execution. Tetration raises the security events for such behavior deviations. Security operations teams can customize those events and severity and associated actions by using simple to define rules. So that's kind of cool. Using this information, operations can quickly identify IOCs and take remediation steps to minimize impact. Obviously, if you're all the way to application segmentation or whitelisting, again, the exposure is going to be very, very minimal, right? Communications from files with said hashes can be blocked within Tetration as well. Intelligence gain here can be used in other preventative platforms. So again, looking at tools, right? There's certain capabilities within the Cisco security stack that's going to prevent some of the tools, or maybe in some instances, it's going to alert on them, right? And so the goal here again is try to build in enough layers to make it very hard for the tools to get it to ever land on that endpoint. And if they do land on the endpoint, whatever they're trying to do, we minimize that exposure as much as possible. So at the end of the day, the adversary is not successful.